Welcome back to Mythic Slumber. Tonight we leave the safe harbours of home and follow a single lantern of curiosity out into the dark. Picture this. You are standing on a wooden dock in Venice, salt air on your lips, the lap of dark water against stone. Around you, silk merchants call in languages you half understand, and somewhere a ship is loading for the east. Our story begins here, with a young merchant's son named Marco Polo. He steps onto that ship, then onto dusty roads, and vanishes slowly into the distance. Across deserts, over mountains, through cities whose names sound like spells. Along the Silk Road, he dines with Khans, crosses frozen passes, and stands in the courts of emperors so far away that Venice begins to feel like a dream. This is the tale of a man who went farther than almost anyone of his time, and never truly returned. Not because he could not, but because the world he found changed him forever. Settle in. Let your breath match the slow pace of a caravan at night. And if this journey brings you peace, you're welcome to like and subscribe so more distant roads await you here. We begin our journey with Marco Polo, on the road that never really ends. Before Marco Polo ever set foot on the Silk Road, his world was water and stone and the smell of salt. Imagine Venice in the 13th century. Not the crowded city of tourists and cameras we know today, but a bustling working harbour, a lacework of canals and alleys perched on wooden piles driven into the lagoon. The air tastes faintly of brine. Oars knock softly against wooden hulls. Bells ring from church towers, marking the hours for merchants and sailors, for bakers and moneylenders, for children running along narrow passages, dodging baskets and bundles. Marco is one of those children. He is born into the merchant class, into the Polo family, who make their living not by ploughing fields, but by moving goods and information across long distances. From an early age, his playground is not just the small courtyard of his home, but the whole city as a living map of routes and relationships. He hears different languages in the markets, Venetian dialects, Latin prayers, Greek curses, snatches of Arabic from traders who have sailed up from the eastern Mediterranean. He smells pepper and cinnamon from distant ports, wool and leather from nearby towns, wax and wine and olive oil. His father Niccolo and his uncle Maffeo are often not there. They are the kind of men who disappear over the horizon for years at a time, following the quiet pull of profit and possibility. They go east, beyond the familiar coasts of the Adriatic and the Aegean, beyond the islands of the eastern Mediterranean, into the Black Sea and further still, into lands where the Mongols rule, and stories grow larger than anyone in Venice can easily believe. When Marco is very small, he knows his father mainly as a voice in other people's stories. Niccolo is the man who rode with caravans under Mongol banners, who walked through cities with domes and walls painted blue, who saw markets where silk was as common as wool, and spices were piled in heaps so high they looked like tiny hills. These tales pass around the family table on winter nights, repeated by his uncle or older relatives, embroidered a little here and there but always circling around the same luminous core. The East is far, rich, and utterly different. Marco listens. He sits quietly, as children often do when they are allowed to linger at the edge of adult conversation. He hears names that sound like incantations: Constantinople, Trebizond, Bukhara, Cathay. He hears about the Great Khan, a ruler whose power stretches from cold northern plains to warm southern seas, commanding horsemen who can ride for days and couriers who can cover in a week what would take others a month. to a boy whose daily world is the soft slap of water against stone, the creak of ships in the lagoon, and the glitter of candlelight on church mosaics, these tales feel both distant and strangely close. After all, Venice itself is a kind of crossroads. Ships arrive from everywhere. Men in foreign clothes walk its streets. Strange coins pass through the hands of money changers on the Rialto Bridge. The horizon is not a barrier here. It is an invitation. At home, Marco learns the skills of a merchant's son. Reading, writing, the careful art of numbers. He watches older men weigh and measure, their hands moving with practiced certainty. Commerce is not romantic in daily practice. It is careful, repetitive, mathematical. Yet behind every number lies a journey. He also learns about absence. His mother dies when he is still young. His father remains away on his long journey east with Maffeo. Marco grows up in the care of other relatives, in a household where older voices and older hands shape his days. He knows what it is to wait, to look at the door and wonder when or if someone will walk back through it. In a way, the pattern of long departures and uncertain returns is imprinted in him, before he ever leaves Venice himself. Occasionally, news of his father filters back like messages from another world. A merchant arrives who once saw Niccolò in some distant caravanserai. A letter comes through tangled roots, written months or years earlier, describing opportunities in the lands beyond the Black Sea, in the great web of the Mongol Empire. These fragments are not enough to satisfy a boy's longing, but they are enough to confirm that the stories are real. Somewhere out there, beyond the reach of his eyes, his father walks through landscapes Marco can only picture in dream-like glimpses. As Marco grows older, he moves through the city with new eyes. He visits trading houses where merchants from distant lands tell stories of mountain passes and desert winds. Some speak of the Mongols with fear, others with wonder. The world beyond Venice is vast and dangerous and full of possibility. The Mongol Empire has created something unexpected. Roads that stretch like veins across continents, guarded and open to those brave enough to travel them. For a family like the Polos, this is not just an empire, it is a path waiting to be walked. Eventually, after years away, Niccolò and Maffeo do return. When Marco meets his father again, he is no longer a small child, but a young man on the threshold of his own adulthood. The reunion is layered. Joy at being together again, curiosity about who each has become, and the subtle sense that their lives have already been shaped by absence as much as by presence. The older men bring with them stories that make the earlier tales seem almost simple. Direct contact with the great Khan, journeys deeper into Asia than any Venetian had made, promises of favour and welcome waiting if they return. Marco listens, as he always has, but now he does so not as a child hearing bedtime stories, but as someone who could join the next chapter. He hears opportunity in the spaces between his father's words. He hears too the unspoken assumption that someone in the next generation of Polos will carry the work forward. The city around him is the same: waterways, markets, churches, the shifting light on stone. But for Marco, Venice is no longer the entire world. It is one end of a line that runs eastward into mystery. Soon, a decision will be made that will take him far from the lagoon, across deserts and mountains, to the court of the Khan himself. A journey that will keep him away for years, long enough that the question, why did he never return, will become less simple than it seems. For now he is still here, in the city of canals and dreams, standing at the water's edge, looking out at a horizon he cannot see, but which he already feels pulling at him as constant and irresistible as the tide. If this quiet journey through Venice helps you find calm, a gentle tap on the like button lets us know we're doing a good job helping you drift off. And now, we follow the road. The day Marco finally leaves Venice is not marked by thunder or omens. The world simply continues, as it always does, but his own line through it bends in a new direction. He boards a ship with his father Niccolo and his uncle Maffeo, leaving the familiar shape of the Venetian skyline, its towers, domes and clustered houses, slowly shrinking behind him. The lagoon that had always held him like a cradle becomes, for the first time, a threshold. The sea ahead is not the end of the world. It is the beginning of the road. At first, the journey is one of water and known coasts. They sail along routes that traders have used for generations, hugging shores where the names of ports are written in familiar script. There are stops in cities that have long dealt with Venetians, places where the Polos know the rate of exchange, the quality of the inns, the best warehouses for storing goods. Marco learns the feel of life at sea, how the ship rocks in different weather, how the air smells different far from land, how nights on deck feel like floating under a bowl of stars. In each port, the language and faces shift slightly. Greek here, more Arabic there, different styles of clothing and prayer. Marco watches his father and uncle move through all of it with practiced ease, greeting old contacts, making new ones, trading news and rumours as naturally as they trade cloth and coins. Business and information flow together. A conversation about the price of pepper swiftly becomes a debate about Mongol politics, or the conditions of the roads further east. Eventually, the sea voyage gives way to land. The travellers disembark in regions where the ships can go no further, and the next stage begins, overland, on ancient routes that weave across Asia like threads in an enormous tapestry. The Silk Road follows rivers, skirts deserts, climbs passes, and descends into fertile valleys. Marco sees his first true caravan, a line of camels stretching along the horizon, bells tinkling softly from their harnesses, packs swaying with each step. The air is full of dust kicked up by hooves and sandals. Men in turbans and caps shout to one another in languages Marco barely recognises. Donkeys bray, dogs bark, children cling to their mothers' robes. It is both chaos and order, each person knowing their place, each animal carrying its load, all moving together toward a destination that might be weeks or months away. The Polos join such caravans when it suits them, travelling under the protection of numbers. There is safety in company. Bandits think twice before attacking a large, well-armed group. At night, when the caravan halts, fires bloom along its length like a string of small red stars on the dark ground. People cook, mend gear, say prayers facing different directions, and sleep rolled in blankets under the open sky. Marco lies awake sometimes, staring up at constellations he knew in Venice, and others that sit differently on this new horizon. The air is dry, cooled from the day's heat, scented with smoke, animal sweat, and the faint spice of whatever is simmering in pots. He can hear voices murmuring nearby, then further away, then the subtle hush as one camp after another sinks into sleep. In those moments, he feels both very far from home and oddly safe, wrapped in the shared vulnerability of travellers between worlds. The landscapes they pass through change slowly, like long chapters in a book. There are rolling plains where the grass moves in waves beneath the wind. There are rocky stretches where the path narrows and the caravan threads between cliffs. There are cities that rise in the distance like mirages and then, suddenly, are all around them. Walls, gates, towers, and markets crowded with people from dozens of lands. In Persian cities, Marco sees architecture unlike anything in Venice. Arches carved with intricate patterns, courtyards shaded by trees, pools where water catches the sky in reflective silence. He walks through bazaars where merchants sell carpets dyed in deep reds and blues, metalwork filigreed with impossible detail, and spices whose names he repeats softly to himself, trying to memorize their shapes on his tongue. He also hears news. Travellers talk, and their words flow along the same routes as their goods. Everywhere the Mongols are a presence, either directly, in the form of governors and tax officials, or indirectly, as a looming force whose permission makes the roads safer for merchants. The empire of the Great Khan stretches behind much of what Marco sees, vast and sometimes harsh, but also strangely efficient. There are relay stations with fresh horses, administrative centres with scribes who speak multiple languages, and standardised practices that make it possible to cross enormous distances without starting anew at every border. For Marco, this is astonishing. He has grown up in a world of city-states and local powers. Here, there is one name that echoes across enormous distances, the Khan. Yet the journey is not easy. They cross deserts where the horizon is nothing but sand and sky, the sun a white weight pressing down on every step. Water is carefully rationed. Animals are watched closely for signs of fatigue. Stories pass among the caravan about travellers who wandered off the path, following a voice that turned out to be only the wind and never returned. At night in such places the sky is fierce with stars, but the ground feels fragile, as if one misstep could send everything sliding into nothingness. Marco learns to trust the guides who know the position of dunes, the way the wind shapes the land, the taste of the air that hints at a distant well. They climb mountains too, following rough paths that cling to slopes where one side drops away into mist. The air thins, breaths grow shorter, animals struggle under their loads. Snow appears, then lingers, then surrounds them, turning the world silent except for the crunch of boots and hooves. Here, the Silk Road is not a romantic ribbon, but a hard test. Marco feels the cold in his fingers, in his bones, in every breath that seems to freeze halfway to his lungs. At high passes they may pause to rest and look out over valleys below, dark and distant. The world seems vast from these heights, too vast for any one life to cross. And yet, step by step, they do cross it. With each new stage, the East becomes less a single idea and more a collection of specific places, faces, and scents. He learns bits of local languages, enough to bargain, to greet, to thank. He begins to feel the subtle shift from being a complete outsider to being something else, a moving piece in the great game of trade that spans half the world. His identity stretches between what he was, a merchant's son from a lagoon city, and what he is becoming, a traveller whose daily reality is dust, stars, and the long, slow tide of the caravan. Whenever the polo party stops for longer in a city, they settle temporarily into its rhythm. In places like Tabriz or Hormuz or other major hubs, they rent rooms, store goods, meet local officials, and gather information before deciding on their next move. For Marco, these pauses are lessons in how the world fits together, how coins change from region to region, how customs differ, how power is displayed differently in each court and marketplace. Always, though, the road calls again. Further east, further inland, toward the heart of the Mongol realm and the court of Kublai Khan, where Niccolo and Maffeo have already once been and to which they are now returning, bringing with them not only trade goods, but themselves as living links between worlds. Marco, by now no longer a novice traveller, has crossed rivers and deserts and mountains. He has slept in crowded inns and under open skies. He has seen cities rise like mirages and resolve into solid stone, then fade again behind him into memory. Each step away from Venice has made the idea of home more abstract, the present road more real. Somewhere beyond the next ridge, beyond the next stretch of plain, waits a court unlike any he has yet seen, a place where his journey will change not only the course of his own life, but the way Europe imagines the world beyond its maps. For now, though, he rides with the caravan under a sky that slowly softens toward evening, the bells on the camels chiming softly, the road ahead dusted with the last light of day, leading him deeper into the heart of the Silk Road. And now, like Marco, we leave the road behind and approach a new world. If these tranquil stories guide you towards deeper sleep, please consider subscribing so you can always find your way back to Mythic Slumber. By the time Marco Polo reaches the heart of the Mongol Empire, the road has carved itself into his bones. He has crossed deserts where the wind seemed determined to erase his footsteps as soon as they were made. He has climbed passes where the sky felt close enough to touch, his breath thin and wheezing in the cold. He has walked through cities that would have seemed like fever dreams to the boy who once played along the canals of Venice. And then, gradually, the road begins to widen, to flatten, to fill with signs that he's approaching not just another town, but the centre of something vast. More messengers ride past, their horses fast and lean, carrying orders sealed in leather pouches. More checkpoints appear, where officials in fur-lined robes inspect travel documents written in elegant Mongol script. The caravans grow thicker, lines of pack animals and carts converging like streams feeding a river. Talk in the camps at night circles around one name more than any other, the Khan. When at last Marco sees the outskirts of the imperial city, it is not a single, sudden vision, but a series of impressions that accumulate like layers of paint. First, there are the far-off glints, rooftops catching the light, banners rippling in the breeze, the faint suggestion of walls. As he moves closer, detail emerges. Towers, gates, roads spreading in all directions. The air smells different here, thick with smoke from countless hearths, rich with the scent of cooking, animals and human life. The city is a meeting place of worlds. Mongol horsemen ride through the streets in leather and fur, their movements easy and assured, bows hanging at their sides. Chinese officials in long silk robes walk with measured dignity, hats marking their rank, scrolls tucked under their arms. Persian merchants, Central Asian traders, and envoys from far-off lands weave through the crowds, each wearing their own fabrics, their own colours, their own ways of tying belts and turbans. Languages murmur and overlap, Mongolian, Chinese, Persian, Turkic tongues, and now, faintly, Venetian Italian as the Polos speak quietly among themselves. Marco's eyes are everywhere at once. He sees wide avenues lined with buildings whose roofs curve upward like waves, their tiles glazed in colours that catch the sun. He sees markets where stalls overflow with unfamiliar goods, fine porcelain painted with cobalt blue, lacquerware that glows like still water, bolts of silk that shimmer like dragonfly wings. He sees animals he has never seen in Venice used as casually as donkeys and horses back home. Yaks, huge and shaggy, pulling loads. Small, sturdy ponies bred for speed and endurance. But beyond the noise and movement, there is another presence, the court itself. The path to the Khan's residence is guarded not by a single gate, but by layers of authority. The Polos must present their credentials, letters, gifts, the memory of earlier visits, at several stages. Word passes inward like a stone, rippling across a pond. The Venetians have returned. Yemen officials note their arrival, attendants whisper, messengers hurry from one inner room to another. When the summons finally comes, it feels both sudden and long delayed. They are brought through courtyards and halls where carved beams are painted in red, blue and gold, where banners hang still in the heavy indoor air. Somewhere, musicians play quiet notes on stringed instruments, their melodies winding through the background like smoke. Servants in robes of different ranks stand ready along the walls, hands folded, eyes lowered. Then, at last, Marco sees him, Kublai Khan. He is older now, his body heavy with the weight of power and time, but his eyes are sharp and the room seems to bend around his presence. He wears fine robes and sits with the ease of absolute command. For a moment, as the Polos bow and present themselves, Marco is simply a young man from Venice standing in front of the most powerful ruler on earth. The great Khan speaks through interpreters when needed, but he is no distant, silent idol. He asks questions. He remembers Niccolò and Maffeo from their earlier visit, the trust he placed in them, the messages they carried. He is curious about the West, about the Pope, about European kings, about lands whose names sound to him as exotic as Cathay once sounded to Venetian ears. He listens, and when he listens, the entire court listens. Marco feels his father's and uncle's eyes on him when it's his turn to speak. He answers carefully, describing Venice and the lands of the Mediterranean, the cities along the way, the nature of trade in the West. His voice may tremble at first, but he has spent months, years, travelling, watching, learning. He is not just a wide-eyed boy anymore. He is a witness. Kublai Khan's gaze turns toward him with particular interest. Here is a young foreigner, clever, observant, unburdened by local loyalties within the empire. Someone who has proven he can endure long journeys, who has seen many places and paid attention to them. Someone who can be shaped into a useful instrument. In the days that follow, the Polos are welcomed with honours. They are given accommodation suitable to guests of importance, with space for servants, animals, and goods. They dine in halls where dishes are brought out in careful sequence. Roasted meats, fragrant rice, vegetables and sauces prepared in ways Marco has never tasted before, sweet pastries and fruits served at the end of the meal. They drink wine and other beverages and learn the court's etiquette around drinking, how to hold the cup, when to raise it, when to bow. Marco watches everything. He watches the way petitions are presented to the Khan, on knees or with deep bows, depending on the petitioner's rank and culture. He watches how Kublai weighs advice, sometimes silent for long intervals before speaking just a few words that settle the matter. He notes the costumes of courtiers, embroidered dragons on silk robes for some Chinese officials, simpler but equally significant patterns on the clothing of Mongol nobles. He notices the hierarchy of seating, the order in which people are called forward, the subtle dance of power in who stands closer to the throne and who waits further back. he's also watching something else unfold. Over time, Kublai begins to test him. Perhaps at first the tasks are small, carrying a message to a nearby official, reporting what he sees in a certain district of the city, explaining some custom of Venetian trade more clearly in a quiet audience. Marco performs these tasks well, with the eager thoroughness of someone who understands that his entire future may rest on making a good impression. Khan takes note. Soon the assignments grow longer. Marco is sent beyond the court, into distant provinces. He travels to observe cities, to listen to local governors, to bring back accounts of what he sees. He becomes the Khan's eyes and ears in places the emperor cannot visit himself. For Marco, this is both thrilling and transforming. He sees parts of China, the Yuan Empire, that almost no one from his homeland has ever seen. Grand Canal systems that carry grain and goods for hundreds of miles. Cities laid out in deliberate geometric patterns. Rice paddies stretching like green mirrors across the lowlands. Temples where incense burns before statues with serene faces and many hands. People praying not in Latin, but in the languages of Buddhism, Taoism, Confucian rites, and local folk beliefs. Everywhere he goes, he gathers what he sees into the storehouse of his memory. When he returns to court and stands again before Kublai Khan, he does not simply say, "The city is well," or "The road is poor." He describes, he explains, he compares. He uses the mind of a merchant and the eyes of a traveller to give the Khan something rare and valuable, a foreigner's clear, detailed perspective. The Khan is pleased. Slowly a new role solidifies. Marco Polo, the Venetian, becomes a trusted agent in a court filled with anyone and everyone but very few like him. He's given robes appropriate to his station, treated with a respect that would have been unimaginable for a merchant's son in many European courts. He rides with retinues, carries documents sealed with the imperial authority, and moves through spaces that ordinary travellers will never see. He has entered a new orbit now, circling around the sun of Kublai's power. The journey that began as a family trading venture has become something else for him, a life within an empire where he is both outsider and insider, favoured and dependent, free to roam great distances, but always, in the end, returning to this court of the Khan. It is here, in this shimmering centre of tents and palaces, that the deeper reasons why Marco Polo never returned begin to take shape, even if he cannot yet see them. For the moment, he is simply amazed, busy, useful, and young, believing there will always be time later to turn his steps back toward the lagoon city that now feels very far away. Once Marco has taken his place at Kublai Khan's court, the road that brought him there does not end. It simply changes shape. Instead of one long line from Venice to the east, his journeys turn into a web that spreads out from the imperial centre and folds back again. Each mission begins in the presence of the Khan and ends there, like a breath drawn in and released. Imagine him summoned to an audience on a clear morning. The palace is already alive with quiet movement. Attendants sweep courtyards, officials arrange themselves in antechambers, guards in lamella armour stand at their posts. The Khan's heralds call names in careful order. When Marco's announced, he steps forward wearing the robes he has been given. Rich but not ostentatious, marking him as someone important yet not of ancient local lineage. Around him, courtiers watch with sidelong interest. Here is the foreigner who speaks with the Khan more often than most. Here is the man from that distant sea city whose maps and customs few here can imagine. Kublai listens as Marco reports on his most recent assignment. Perhaps he has just returned from inspecting a canal project, or from a province where tax collection has faltered, or from a city rumoured to be restless under Mongol rule. Marco describes what he saw: the condition of the roads, the mood of the people, the truth behind the rumours. He notices details that others might overlook: how full the markets seem, how often soldiers and civilians argue, how quickly couriers arrive after a message has been sent. Khan does not reward such clarity with lavish praise. That is not his way. But he nods, asks questions, and then sends Marco out again. This is how trust is shown, not in speeches, but in repeated use. Soon Marco is riding across the empire with imperial authority behind him. His name and foreignness travel ahead of him like a rumour. In one city, officials greet him with stiff formality, uneasy under the scrutiny of a favoured outsider. In another, local people gather at a distance to stare, curious about his clothes, his speech, the light colour of his hair or eyes. Everywhere he goes, he walks a careful line. He is there as the Khan's representative, but he is also the guest of the hosts who feed him, house him, and escort him through their streets. He must observe without insulting, question without provoking. His words carry weight that travels back to the throne. But Marco has been absorbing lessons since he left Venice. He has watched his father and uncle negotiate deals in half a dozen cultures. He has listened to translators weigh their words. He has already survived deserts, mountains, and the natural dangers of travel. Now he learns to navigate human landscapes with the same attention. On some missions, he rides through the rich lowlands of China, where fields of rice lie in careful rows and farmers bend ankle-deep in water. He notes the irrigation works, the storage granaries, the ways in which famine is kept at bay or not. He watches how local administrators treat the people, whether they collect taxes fairly or squeeze more than the edicts allow. On others, he travels further afield, into regions where the Mongol grip is lighter and the old powers still stir under the surface. Here, loyalty is more fragile, and the presence of an imperial envoy can calm tensions, or inflame them if handled poorly. Marco learns when to present himself with full ceremony, and when to move more quietly, letting the sight of the imperial seal speak louder than his own voice. Between journeys he returns to the court and slips back into its rhythm. He eats in halls where men from dozens of cultures share the same long tables. He hears music not only from China, but from Central Asia and beyond. Lutes and flutes, drums and bowed instruments, each carrying the sound of a different place. He sees entertainers perform feats of acrobatics, magic tricks, and storytelling. The court is a theatre where the diversity of the empire unfolds. Over time, Marco's position settles into something both privileged and strange. He is not a general. He does not command armies. He is not a hereditary noble. He does not own estates. He is instead a trusted observer and messenger, a bridge between peripheries and centre, between one culture and another. For Kublai, this is useful. For Marco, it is both exhilarating and limiting. He enjoys comforts he could never have claimed in Venice: fine clothes, good food, a place close enough to the Khan that his words matter. He sees wonders: paper money used as casually as coins, postal systems with horse relays and way stations, cities larger than any in the West. He learns to appreciate tea, to recognise Chinese characters, to follow court gossip carried in whispers along polished corridors. Yet he is always, unmistakably, a stranger. When he walks through the palace, servants recognize him but do not treat him as one of their own. When he sits in councils, he is listened to, but he knows that others whisper about the foreigner's influence. If he missteps politically, he has no clan structure within the empire to shield him, no local allies who have known his family for generations. All his security flows from one source, the favour of the Khan. That favour for many years seems steady. The Khan values loyalty and competence wherever he finds them. Marco, by working diligently and speaking plainly, becomes one of many threads holding together a rule that spans vast distances. It is easy, in such a position, to let the idea of returning home slip to the edges of consciousness. When he first travelled east, Marco might have thought of the journey as something with a clear turnaround point. Go, serve, trade, then come back to Venice richer in knowledge and goods. But the years accumulate like layers of lacquer on wood. One mission follows another. Seasons cycle, summers humid and heavy, winters sharp and cold. Children are born, at court who know only this world, not the world that lies beyond deserts and seas. Older courtiers die, and are replaced by younger ones for whom Marco has always been there, a fixture as familiar as any Mongol noble. Venice, in his mind, becomes an afterimage. He can still picture the glint of light on the lagoon, the sound of church bells over water, the smell of fish and tar at the docks. But those memories no longer belong to his daily life. They are like scenes brought up in dream, gently blurred, their edges softened by time. Meanwhile, the tasks of the day are all tied to the east, to reports that must be written, to roads that must be ridden, to questions the Khan wants answered. And yet, even as he grows more embedded, the empire around him is not standing still. Kublai Khan is aging. The imperial rhythm shifts, subtle changes that accumulate like dust on silk. For Marco, this creates an odd tension. His importance as a trusted foreign agent may grow as the Khan narrows his circle. But the risks grow too. If succession struggles intensify, if different factions at court begin to compete for influence, being a favourite of the current ruler could make him a target in the eyes of those who imagine a different future. And behind all of this lies a quieter truth. The more deeply he builds a life here, the harder it becomes to imagine leaving it. He has friends now, fellow officials, translators, servants whose faces he would miss. He knows the rhythms of this court as intimately as he once knew the patterns of Venetian markets. He has reached a position here that would be almost impossible to duplicate back home. In Venice, he would return as a merchant tied to ledgers and warehouses. In Kublai's empire, he is a man whose reports sway the decisions of an emperor. The golden threads of privilege and power can, without anyone intending it, weave themselves into a cage. Marco does not yet know that a day will come when he and his family will ask to leave and be refused, not once but several times. He does not yet know that years will pass before the Khan finally lets them go, and that by then, the world they are leaving will already be changing into something they could never return to even if they tried. For now, he rides out when summoned, returns when called, and lives as both Venetian and imperial servant, held close by the gravity of a ruler whose favour has turned a wandering merchant's son into one of the most far-travelled observers of his age, and whose embrace makes the idea of ever truly going back to the life before feel more and more distant, almost unreal. From far away, it might seem simple. Why didn't Marco Polo just go home? To someone standing in Venice, looking east across the water, the route might appear like a long rope. follow it out, then follow it back. But when you're standing in the middle of that rope, woven into it, the idea of going back is not a straight line, it's a knot. For Marco and his family, the knot began with a promise. When Niccolo and Maffeo first met Kublai Khan years earlier, they did not arrive as idle travellers. They came as merchants and potential allies. The Khan, curious about the West, had asked them to return to Europe and bring back learned men, holy oil from Jerusalem, and news of the Pope. When they returned with Marco, they were in a sense completing that promise. Their presence at court was not accidental. It was part of an ongoing relationship with the most powerful ruler in Asia. To leave too soon would have felt like breaking that relationship. As long as Kublai valued them, the Polos were under a kind of invisible contract. To serve, to advise, to carry out missions. The Khan rewarded them richly, with status, permission to trade, and positions of trust. In return, he expected loyalty. Not the hesitant part-time loyalty of seasonal traders, but the deep, continuous loyalty he demanded from his own governors and generals. In such a world, simply saying, "We've had enough, we'd like to go home now," was not an easy thing. There were also practical dangers. The journey they had already made to reach the Khan's court had taken years. They knew exactly what it cost. Deserts that could swallow men whole. Mountains where snow and thin air cut into lungs. Bandits who might look at a small group of wealthy foreigners and see only opportunity. Travel in the Mongol Empire was safer than it had been in many earlier eras, but it was not safe in the way you might imagine a simple voyage. Even with official passes and escorts, there were risks every step of the way. When you have already crossed that distance once, and you're older now, the thought of doing it all again is not as glamorous as it sounds. Then there is time. At first, the Polos might have thought of their stay as temporary, a few years of service, and then back to Venice with stories and wealth. But years have a way of rolling into one another. One mission turns into another. One winter blends into the next. Festivals come round in cycles. The faces at court change slowly as some men die and younger officials rise. Before Marco fully realizes it, a good portion of his life has already been spent under Mongol skies. He has grown from youth into a seasoned man here. His skills, his reputation, his relationships are all tied to this place. In Venice, he would be, in some ways, starting over. At Kublai's court, he is Marco Polo, the foreign advisor who has ridden across provinces, who has the ear of the Khan, who can move through corridors others approach only with caution. In Venice, he would be one merchant among many, competing for contracts and space on ships, trying to reinsert himself into family business that has adapted in his absence. Human beings tend to remain where their efforts have already built something. For Marco, that something is here, not on the lagoon. There is also the personal element, Kublai himself. For all his power and distance, the Khan is not an abstract figure to the Polos. He is a man they know, a ruler who put trust in them when others might have mistrusted foreigners, a patron who has made their fortunes and positions possible. Even when they grow tired, even when they quietly wish to see their homeland again, there is a weight in their chests when they consider asking to leave. You can imagine the first time they broach the subject. Perhaps they choose a moment when the Khan is in a calm mood, when the affairs of the empire are running smoothly. They come before him in the proper way, bowing, offering gifts or respectful words, then gently explaining that they have been away from Venice for many years. They speak of family left behind, of obligations at home. They phrase it not as ingratitude, but as a simple truth. They are growing older. They would like to see their city again while they still can. The Khan listens. His answer is politely firm. Not yet. He still has need of them. He still values their service. The empire is vast, and many can trust, truly trust, are not easily replaced. For Marco, that not yet lands like another assignment. He is a loyal servant in a culture where loyalty is not light. You do not walk away from a ruler like Kublai the way you walk away from a contract in a Venetian marketplace. To press the issue too often, too loudly, would risk angering the one person whose favour protects them in this foreign land. So they stay. Years pass. Kublai grows older. The empire shifts on its foundations. The Polos, somewhere deep inside, must begin to realise that if they do not go soon, they may never go at all. The roads could become more dangerous. Succession struggles could make travel permits harder to obtain. A new ruler might not look kindly on the favoured foreign family of the old one. Still, each attempt to ask is a delicate thing. You can imagine them trying again, perhaps after Marco returns from a particularly long mission, tired and contemplative. Once more, they raise the subject. Once more, the answer is a gentle refusal. In the balance between their longing for home and the Khan's need for reliable envoys, their longing does not yet weigh enough. This is the golden cage of the Silk Road. Comfort, status, and duty locking together so tightly that the door outward, though not physically barred, might as well be. There is another layer to the knot too, identity. By now, Marco is no longer only Venetian, even in his own eyes. He has absorbed court customs, learned languages, adopted habits. He knows which ceremonies require which gestures. He knows how to speak to Mongol nobles, how to greet Chinese scholars, how to deal with Central Asian merchants. Inwardly, he has become a man of in-between places. If he returned to Venice, he would not be the same person who left. He would carry with him a world that most of his countrymen could not imagine, let alone understand. The East has not just changed his career, it has changed his sense of what the world is and where he belongs within it. When you've spent so long in one reality, another, even the one you came from, can begin to feel like a story you once heard rather than a place you truly lived. And so, year after year, the reasons to stay gently pile up. Duty to the Khan, fear of the journey, comfort in a role he knows, uncertainty about his place in Venice, the slow, subtle shift of his own inner compass. From a distance, it might look like hesitation. From inside his life, it feels like something else. Being held in orbit around a powerful sun, always planning to step away, but finding that each time you look down at the road back, it has grown longer, more tangled, and more unfamiliar. When the Polos finally do receive true permission to leave, it will be after many such years, when both they and the Empire are changed, and the world waiting for them in Venice will be as much a new country as China once was. For now, though, as Marco rides out once more on another mission, the question, why doesn't he just go home, lingers somewhere at the back of his thoughts, like a distant bell. He hears it faintly now and then, but the sounds of hoofbeats, orders, reports, and the Khan's voice are closer, louder and harder to ignore. In the beginning, Marco might have counted the years. 1 year since leaving Venice, 2 years since seeing the lagoon, 3 years since hearing the bells of San Marco with his own ears. But as he settles into the rhythm of Kublai Khan's empire, those numbers lose their sharp edges. The years begin to flow past like sand in a long, slow gust of wind. each grain distinct if you hold it in your palm, but from a distance, just a drifting, shifting cloud. Life at court has its own calendar. There are spring festivals when the air softens and banners are raised high, snapping in the breeze. There are summer days when the heat presses down on the palace roofs, and the city hums with insects and human voices, the air heavy with the smell of cooking and horse sweat. There are autumn gatherings when envoys from different corners of the empire arrive, bringing tribute and grievances, their caravans laden with fur, jade, silver, textiles and stories. There are winter councils when the winds grow sharp, and decisions about campaigns, taxes and appointments are made in long, dim halls warmed by braziers. Through all of these seasons, Marco moves like a thread woven again and again through the same tapestry. He rides out on missions, then returns, his horse's hooves clattering over the same courtyard stones, his footsteps echoing along the same corridors. He learns the favourite phrases of certain officials, the small jokes they make when they are relaxed, the careful words they choose when tension is high. He becomes familiar with the way the Khan's mood can be read in tiny signs, the tilt of his head, the length of a pause before he responds, the way he grips the arms of his throne when a report displeases him. For a while, each mission feels distinct. Here is the year he travelled to a great city near the southern seas, where ships with strange high sterns brought goods from India and beyond. He remembers the humid air, the heavy monsoon rains drumming on tiled roofs, the forests that seem to breathe with life. He remembers the temples, the statues of deities with many arms or serene seated faces, the offerings of fruit and flowers and smoke. Here is the year he rode north, closer to the steppes, where the wind came unhindered across the grasslands and the sky felt enormous. He remembers jurs, round felt tents, clustered near rivers, herds grazing in the distance, horses moving like a tide across the land. He remembers evenings when the sun sank low and turned everything gold, and he sat by a fire listening to songs in a language he did not fully understand, but whose melancholy and pride needed no translation. Here is the year he followed the great canal routes, watching barges loaded with grain slide silently through a waterway system so vast and efficient it felt like a second, flowing road carved by human hands. He remembers climbing onto a small rise and seeing boats strung along the horizon in every direction, as though the land itself were transporting the Empire's lifeblood from place to place. Each journey leaves images like this in his mind, bright and sharp at first. He returns to the court, reports what he has seen, and then time moves on. Another mission comes, another year, another landscape. The new memories settle on top of the old, layer upon layer, until his mind holds a map that no one else at court quite shares. A great composite of mountains, deserts, canals, cities and faces, all connected by the endless thread of the road. Meanwhile, the older he grows, the less he resembles the young Venetian who first arrived. His clothes are those of an imperial official, cut and coloured according to ranks and seasons. His posture has adjusted to local customs, when to bow, how to sit, how close to stand when speaking to people of different status. His language, even when he speaks in his mother tongue with his father and uncle, carries the cadence of other tongues. Sometimes he reaches for a word and finds the Mongol or Persian term first, then has to pull the Italian from deeper down, like something stored in a chest that hasn't been opened in a while. His inner world is stretched across two horizons. On one side, Venice still glows, like a memory seen across water, distant, shimmering, incomplete. He can recall the smell of the sea there, the particular way light falls on damp stone, the sound of gondoliers' voices bouncing between close walls. He remembers his younger self, walking those narrow alleys, dreaming about the East as a vast, unknown world. On the other side, there is the very real, immediate life he lives now. He knows which side door leads quickest from his quarters to the audience hall. He knows the names of guards at different gates, the quirks of the scribes who copy his reports, the best stalls in certain city markets for particular teas or sweets. He has acquaintances among Chinese scholars, Mongol captains, Central Asian merchants, a mosaic of faces and friendships that would have been unimaginable when he was a boy. Sometimes, late at night, he must feel suspended between these two worlds, like a rope pulled taut. If he looks back along its length, he sees the path to Venice, very long, very dangerous, fading into distance and memory. If he looks forward, he sees the next mission, the next season, the slow, steady march of Kublai's reign toward old age. He belongs to both ends, and yet, fully, to neither. In these years, the question of return does not vanish. It simply sinks below the surface of daily demands. There are times when it rises suddenly, like a bubble in boiling water. A letter arrives from the west, delayed, worn, describing changes in Venice, new alliances, new rivalries, new buildings, deaths, and marriages. Someone he once knew as a youth is now an older man or gone entirely. He realizes with a slight shock that his own generation back home has grown into their middle years while he was away. He is no longer the absent boy, he is the absent man. On such days the ache of longing sharpens. He may find himself drifting in thought during a meeting, picturing the pale winter light on the lagoon, wondering what his relatives would think if he walked through the door of the family home again. Would they recognize him? Would they believe the stories he carries? Or would he be, even there, a stranger, someone too changed by distance to be fully understood? And yet, when the summons comes, from the Khan, from the council, from the machinery of empire, he answers. Duty, once accepted and repeated, builds its own momentum. He is useful here, needed. That word can be heavy, but it can also be warm. To be needed is to know that if you vanished, someone would notice. If Marco left abruptly, tasks would go undone, questions unanswered, routes uninspected. The very value that traps him is also a kind of affirmation. It tells him he is not a drifting leaf blown far from home. He's a chosen piece in a great design, placed there by the hand of a ruler who commands half a world. Around him, the empire keeps changing. Rebellions flare in distant provinces, sometimes put down swiftly, sometimes smouldering for years. The Mongol elite adjust to life as settled rulers, walking the halls of Chinese-style palaces as easily as they once rode open grasslands. Administrators wrangle over tax rates and grain shipments. The edges of the empire grow more fragile, its farthest corners more independent, but here, near the centre, life continues with the sense of continuity that can be deceptive. Some days, when Marco stands in a palace courtyard and watches the sun pass overhead, it may feel as though this world will last forever. Other days, he sees the lines at the corners of Kublai's eyes deepen, hears a cough that wasn't there before, notices that certain old generals walk more slowly now, leaning a little more heavily on their staffs. Time leaves marks on everyone, even emperors, and in quiet moments, perhaps in the soft hush that follows a long day of audiences and reports, Marco must sense something else, that his own time here is finite, whether he returns to Venice or not. No road goes on forever. not even the Silk Road. No favour lasts forever, not even that of a great Khan. No life stretches without end between two worlds. For the moment, though, he continues to live in this in-between space, years slipping past like sand through an open hand. Too many grains to count, too many memories to hold all at once. The knot that binds him to the east tightens and loosens by turns, but never quite comes undone. From far away, later storytellers will say, he never returned. But inside these years, that choice is not a single moment. It is 1,000 small decisions to stay one more season, to ride one more mission, to answer one more summons from the Khan, until the idea of turning back along the road to Venice becomes less a plan and more a wistful thought that visits him at night and leaves again at dawn. Empires rarely shatter all at once. They shift, like sand beneath foundations, long before anyone admits the ground has changed. By the time Marco notices the first real changes at Kublai Khan's court, he has already spent many years in its service. He knows the patterns by now. The cycle of envoys arriving and departing, the rhythm of councils called and dismissed, the steady tide of grain and silver flowing in from the provinces. For a long while, it all felt solid, like a great humming machine. Then gently at first the tone shifts. There are more urgent councils called at odd hours. Messengers arrive looking more harried, their horses lathered in sweat. Discussions about tribute become sharper, less assured. In one corner of the empire a rebellion flares and takes longer than expected to put down. In another, a powerful local family drags its feet when asked to supply troops or taxes. Letters from distant governors hint at unrest that is no longer just local banditry but something heavier, more organised. Marco, who travels often, sees these changes not as headlines, but as small adjustments in the way people behave. A city that once greeted imperial envoys with easy confidence now receives him with polite worry in its eyes. Markets that used to overflow with goods are a little thinner, prices are a little higher, merchants talk more cautiously about the future. In some places he hears quiet complaints whispered only after doors are closed, about taxes that feel too heavy, about officials who are less responsive than they once were, about fear that the great Mongol peace might be fraying. When he returns to court and reports these impressions, he speaks carefully. On the one hand, he owes the Khan the truth. On the other, he knows that every word he says can weigh on decisions that affect thousands of lives. Kublai listens, as he always has, but now there is a new gravity in his silence. The emperor is older. His face, once broad and full of vigour, carries deeper lines. His beard shows more grey. When he rises, it is with the effort of a man whose body remembers campaigns and winters long past. The sheer volume of his responsibilities, an empire stretching from the steppes to the sea, has carved itself into his bones. Age does not make him weak overnight. He is still the great Khan. But the balance has shifted. In earlier years, his commands move swiftly, like water finding its path. Now they travel more slowly, dulled by distance and by the weight of an empire grown vast and complex. At court, the atmosphere shifts. Conversations grow more careful. Alliances form and reform like patterns in water. Marco is not at the very centre of these rivalries, but he cannot miss their outlines. He hears arguments that cut off abruptly when he enters a room. He notices which names are suddenly spoken less often, which courtiers seem to withdraw from public life without clear explanation. A joke that would once have been easy now requires more thought. In the midst of this, the Polo's old question begins to rise again. When will it be safe to go home? It is not a simple matter of desire. They have wanted to see Venice again for years. But leaving an empire in flux is far riskier than leaving one at its height. If they depart too soon, it might be seen as an insult or as a lack of confidence in the Khan. If they wait too long, a new ruler might come to power who sees them not as trusted servants, but as suspicious foreigners closely tied to the previous regime. So they watch Kublai carefully, and they wait for a moment that feels both respectful and urgent. Perhaps one evening, after returning from yet another mission, where tensions in a province were harder to smooth over than before, Marco sits with his father and uncle in private. The lamps burn low. The room is quiet except for the soft hiss of oil and the murmur of distant voices from some other chamber. They speak softly in their own language about what they see. The empire is still rich, still vast, still magnificent, but the energy that once pushed it outward has slowed. The Khan is old. The world is changing. If they are ever to take the road back, this may be their last chance to do it under Kublai's protection, with proper documents and safe conducts that will still be respected along the way. The next step is both necessary and painful. They must ask again. When they are next granted a private audience, they bow deeply as always. They speak first of service and gratitude, of the honour they have felt in serving the great Khan all these years. Then gently, they add what weighs on their hearts, that Venice is far away, that their family line in the west will vanish if they never return, that they have grown older in his service and long to see their homeland before they are too old to travel. This time, the request lands differently. Kublai is not the same man who refused them in his younger, more secure years. He is a ruler who has seen rebellions and disappointments, who knows his own strength is not what it once was. He may feel in some quiet part of himself that the world he built is reaching the end of its first great chapter. He looks at the Venetians before him, men who have served loyally, who have never betrayed him, who crossed half the world to answer his call, and perhaps he feels something close to tenderness, or at least respect. At last, he says yes, not in a dramatic flourish, but with his steady granting of permission. They may return to the west. They will be given letters of safe passage. They will escort a Mongol princess part of the way, travelling by sea along routes that are dangerous but faster than the endless caravans. Their departure will be framed not as abandonment, but as a mission, a final service, for the empire they have served for so long. For Marco, the news must feel unreal at first. For years, going home has been an idea pushed into the future, a some days that never quite arrives. Now suddenly it has a shape, routes to be chosen, ships to be readied, supplies to be gathered. He walks through the familiar palace, knowing he will soon leave it behind, perhaps forever. Rooms he took for granted now glow with the bittersweet light of last looks. He passes courtiers who have become part of the scenery of his life, a scribe who always nodded to him in the mornings, a guard at a certain gate who once saved him from a minor breach of protocol, an official who argued loudly in council but sent him small gifts of tea from his home province. They are not family, not countrymen, but they are part of the web of his days. As he prepares to leave, he feels the threads loosen and fall away. He will not return to this world as it is now. Even if he were to somehow make the journey again in later years, it would not be to the same empire. Kublai will not live forever. The edicts that now carry his seal will one day bear another's. The court will change, as courts always do. New favourites, new priorities, a new balance of power. The China and Mongolia Marco has known under Kublai Khan are already entering their twilight as he packs his belongings. This too is part of why he never returned. It is not only that the journey is long or that his life will root again in Venice, it is that the East he knew is itself vanishing. To travel back years later would not be to step into the same world. It would be to visit a place transformed, already becoming something he could not recognize. When the day of departure comes, the Polos bow before Kublai one final time. They speak words of thanks. He in turn may give them gifts, assurances, and a blessing in the manner of his court. Then they turn and walk away, through halls they know by heart, toward gates that will close behind them. Outside, the world is waiting. Ships on the horizon, seas to cross, dangers to face, and a distant half-remembered city of canals and bells that has been growing older in their absence. The empire, shifting through Kublai's final years, has opened a path for them to slip through, out of the golden cage of the Silk Road, and onto the long, perilous path that will bring them back to the West, changed forever, carrying within them a world they can never truly return to, except in memory and in the stories they will tell. Permission to leave is one thing, actually leaving is another. Once Kublai Khan agrees to let the Polos return to the West, life at court does not immediately stop and bow to their departure. The empire still moves, officials still bring petitions, armies still march. But for Marco, something quiet and irreversible has shifted. He begins to walk through his days as someone already half on the road. The plan for leaving is intricate because it is tied to one last service. A Mongol princess is to be married far to the west in Persia to a ruler allied with the Khan. It would be faster and safer for a woman of such rank to go by sea, skirting the deadly stretches of desert and mountains the Polos once crossed on foot and by caravan. The Venetians, with their deep knowledge of ships and salt water, will help lead this escort. Their journey home will be twined with hers, like two ropes braided together for a time. Preparations begin at coastal city, far from the inland glitter of the court. Marco travels there ahead of departure, and as he approaches the sea for the first time in many years, a strange sensation moves through him. The sight of waves rolling in against the shore, the smell of salt and tar and rotting seaweed. These things are familiar, but not in the way the canals of Venice were. This is another ocean, another coastline, another version of something he has loved his whole life. Harbours in the east are no less busy than those in the Mediterranean. Ships crowd the docks, their hulls high and curved, sails furled or hanging loose in the still air. Crews shout to one another across gangplanks. Crates and jars are hoisted with ropes and pulleys. Officials with lists and seals move from one vessel to another, checking cargo, counting, approving. Somewhere in the middle of all this organised chaos are the ships that will carry the princess, her retinue, and the Polos. They are made ready with care. Cabins are set aside for the royal passenger, with fine hangings and cushions to soften the hardness of wood and waves. Storage holds are packed with grain, dried meat, water in great ceramic jars, tools for repairs, and gifts for distant courts. Chests belonging to the Polos are loaded too, filled with what they have left after years of service, a blend of Eastern riches and practical necessities for a long return. The princess arrives with her own gravity. She is young, veiled, surrounded by attendants and guards, but her presence feels like a quiet star around which entire orbits realign. Her future husband waits in a land she has never seen. Her world, like Marco's, is being pulled out from under her feet and stretched across an ocean. They're both leaving homes they may never see again, carried along by decisions made in rooms where they could not refuse. When the day comes to set sail, the air is thick with moisture and the electric tension of departure. Lines are cast off, sails rise like pale wings. The harbour, with its crowd of watchers, begins to slip backward, shrinking as the ships move out into deeper water. Marco stands on deck, the wind tugging at his clothes, and watches the shoreline of the empire he has lived in for so many years recede. Behind that thin strip of land lies the court of Kublai Khan, the palaces he walked, the friends he made, the languages he learned, the roads he rode until his bones knew their rhythms. All of it starts to fold into memory even as he looks at it. The first days at sea are busy. There are routines to learn or relearn for life aboard. The times meals are taken, the watch shifts, the way to move across wet decks without slipping. Sailors from different backgrounds must coordinate. Mongols unused to long sea voyages, Chinese mariners who know every temper of these waters, perhaps even some foreign seamen hired for their skills. Commands are shouted in multiple tongues, but the language of wind and waves is universal. At first, the weather is kind. The sea is not flat, it never is, but it rolls in a steady way that bodies can adjust to. The princess stays mostly within her cabin, attended by her ladies, glimpsing the sky and water only through narrow openings. Marco, more accustomed to travel, spends time on deck, watching the line where sea meets sky, thinking about the invisible routes that connect this coast to others, to islands he has heard of but never seen, to ports whose names taste almost mythic when spoken aloud. As days blur into weeks, the fleet makes landfall at certain points to resupply. On strange shores, Marco sees yet another set of worlds. Tropical coasts heavy with heat and green, where palms and unfamiliar trees cast speckled shade. Markets where spices grow so sharp in the air they almost sting his nostrils. Locals whose clothing, houses and gods are different again from everything he has known before. Every stop could be a story of its own, but now they are way stations, beads threaded on a single cord that is pulling him home. At night, he sometimes stands alone, leaning on the rail, listening to the creak of masts and the slap of waves against the hull. The stars above are both foreign and familiar. Some constellations he saw as a boy in Venice, others he has learned to name from Eastern astronomers. Under that mixed sky, his life feels like a long arc between two sets of lights, one over a lagoon, one over an empire, both now behind him, both carried inside. But the sea is not gentle forever. Storms come, as they always do to those who travel far. Clouds gather on the horizon, deepening from grey to darker shades. The wind rises, pulling at the sails, singing through the rigging. Rain sweeps across the decks, waves roll higher, washing over the sides in heavy sheets. In such moments the routines of empire and court fade away. Everyone moves together in the work of survival. Sailors tend the sails, their hands steady despite the wet. Passengers hold on as the ship rises and falls with the waves. Some ships in the fleet fare better than others. The sea is vast and not all journeys are the same. When the fleet gathers again at the next port, some vessels arrive later than others, their crews with stories of different routes and different weather. The Polos pass through these storms, and the experience settles into memory. Nights when the ship's sounds became unfamiliar, when sleep came only in brief moments, when the vastness of the sea felt more real than any map or plan. And yet, after each storm there is stillness again. The sky clears, air smells newly washed. The sea glitters in the light as though nothing had happened, as though it had not just tried to fold ships and lives back into its depths. Work goes on, repairing what can be repaired, patching canvas, checking casks of food and water for damage. The voyage continues. Slowly the shape of the world changes. The stars shift slightly overhead. The angle of the sun feels different. The languages heard in distant harbours lean more and more toward the west. The polos step onto wharves where faces look a little more familiar, where the script on signs twists back toward letters they knew as children. Still foreign, still far, but tilted in the direction of home. At some point, no single moment marks it, but the feeling deepens. Marco understands that he is no longer just leaving the East. He is leaving a particular East, Kublai Khan's East, the Silk Road under one great ruler, the empire of grand councils and wide-ranging envoys. By the time he might, in theory, return, that world will likely be altered beyond recognition. Kublai will die. Succession struggles will reshape power. Regions that once answered quickly to the centre will drift, assert themselves, change allegiances. The court he knew, with its careful balance of Mongol and Chinese customs, its specific faces and rivalries, will dissolve like a pattern in sand after the tide. Even if he turned around tomorrow and somehow retraced his route, he would not step into the same story. So as the ships push westward, every rise and fall of the waves is not just a measure of distance travelled. It is a slow, steady closing of a door behind him. He has lived years as a thread in Kublai's tapestry. Now, gently, that thread is being pulled out, carried away across the ocean, to be worked into another cloth entirely. One woven in Venetian markets, in Mediterranean ports, in the small, close rooms where stories are told to men who will never see the places he has seen. When at last the fleet nears the coast of the Islamic world, and then the ports that open toward the Mediterranean, Marco can feel the weight of the journey behind him like a second spine. He is not the boy who left, curious and untried. He is a man whose memories could fill libraries, whose inner map includes deserts, palaces, mountain passes, and storm-dark seas. He will reach Venice again. He will walk once more along stone paths beside water, hear church bells, smell the familiar mix of fish and salt and human life. But part of him will always be anchored to the east he left behind, to palaces lit by lanterns, to the silent, listening gaze of an aging emperor. Marco Polo never returned to that world. He carried it instead, folded into his mind, stitched into his speech, and that is how it would travel back along the Silk Road, not on tired camels and worn shoes, but in the form of stories that would outlive empires, and a name that, long after ships and caravans changed their routes, would still whisper of a journey that went farther than most can ever imagine. When Marco Polo finally reaches Venice again, it is almost like arriving in a story he once heard long ago, rather than returning to a place he truly lived. The sea that carries him into the lagoon is the same kind of water he knew as a boy, but he is not the same, and Venice has not stood still in his absence. The skyline rises slowly out of the mist. Campaniles, church domes, clustered roofs, and the familiar low line of buildings perched almost impossibly on the water. Boats move in every direction, oars lifting and dipping, sails catching the wind. The air smells of salt and fish, tar, smoke, and the faint sourness of busy canals. Bells ring from towers he remembers, but now their sound feels like a question. Do you still belong here? As his ship glides closer, Marco sees faces on the quayside, but few he recognizes. Children have become adults. Adults have become old. Some are gone completely, their places taken by sons and nephews or strangers. The docks bustle with activity that has nothing to do with him. Barrels hoisted, crates counted, arguments over prices and dock fees. For Venice, another ship has come in. That is all. The city does not pause for the return of one man, no matter how far he has travelled. He steps onto the stone, and the solidness of it after so long at sea feels almost shocking. Once, he ran across these walkways without thinking. Now he moves slowly, noticing every sound. The echo of footsteps against stone walls, the splash of water under low bridges, the sharp call of traders advertising their wares. His family's house, what is left of it, who is left in it, is his first destination. He walks streets that are both familiar and strange, like a dream where everything is slightly shifted. When he appears in his own doorway, he's greeted not with instant recognition, but with confusion. At first they see a traveller from the east, a man whose clothes, posture and manner carry the imprint of distant courts. His beard, his hair, the way he stands, none of it matches the memory of the young man who left so many years ago. Only after a moment, when someone looks more closely at his eyes, at certain angles of his face, do the pieces click together. You are Marco. You are home. There is joy, of course. Embraces that smell of tears and old dust, voices that tremble with disbelief and happiness. For a brief time, the long rope that tied him to Venice snaps tight again, pulling him fully back into the circle of family and neighbourhood. Stories tumble out on both sides. Who died, who married, who prospered, who lost everything. But beneath the joy lies something harder to name: distance. Marco has lived two lives, one on the lagoon, one under the wide skies and heavy roofs of Kublai Khan's empire. He has eaten at the tables of the greatest ruler of his age, walked through cities larger than any Venetian can easily imagine, crossed deserts and mountains with caravans that felt like moving villages. His relatives, for all their intelligence and experience, have never seen these things. Their questions come fast. Is it true? Are there such cities? Did you really meet the great Khan? When he answers, he must choose his words carefully. Tell too little, and everything shrinks into a simple, almost disappointing tale. Tell too much, and it begins to sound unbelievable. He speaks of paper money used in place of gold and silver. He speaks of black stones that burn like wood, coal. He speaks of giant markets, roads guarded by imperial patrols, postal systems that move faster than any merchant caravan in Europe. Some listen with fascination. Others smile and nod politely, uncertain how to picture what he describes. The East he knew feels distant even to him now, harder to explain than to remember. In this gap between memory and words, a quiet distance grows. Marco is home, but part of him remains elsewhere. He carries experiences that have no easy translation into the language of the lagoon. In Venice, value is measured in spices, cloth, coin, and ships. Most people here have never had to stretch their imagination over half the world. His memories, vivid and exhausting, bounce against the narrow walls of their experience and find no way in. Life insists on practical things. He must reintegrate into the world of Venetian merchants, where deals are made in close, smoky rooms, contracts are written and sealed, and fortunes rest on the price of pepper or the success of a single voyage. He brings with him valuable knowledge of Eastern routes and markets, but those routes now are dangerous and uncertain. The Mongol Empire that once made long-distance trade safer is beginning to strain. The unique window he lived in is already closing. There is also politics. Venice is not an idle backwater. It is a city that plays in the hard game of Mediterranean power. It fights with Genoa over trade routes. It negotiates with lords on the mainland, with emperors and popes. Marco steps into this current as just one more Venetian, albeit one with stories no one else can tell. Somewhere along the way, Venice and Genoa find themselves at odds once again, as they often do. In the course of these conflicts, Marco becomes one of many held in Genoa for a time. His world, which once stretched across empires, now contracts to quieter rooms and slower days. The man who once rode through cities glittering with lanterns now stares at coarse stone and hears only the echoes of footsteps in a corridor. And it is here, in confinement, that his journey takes its most unexpected turn. Marco meets Rustichello da Pisa, a writer and storyteller held in the same prison. Rustichello is accustomed to turning noble adventures into romances, tales of knights, quests, and distant lands meant to entertain courts and listeners hungry for something beyond their everyday lives. Marco has exactly that, a life full of something beyond. Day after day, cell after cell, conversation after conversation, he begins to dictate his experiences, not as a dry ledger of dates and figures, but as a flowing story, cities, customs, rulers, routes. He describes Kublai Khan's court, the great cities of Cathay, the steppes, the deserts, the sea crossing, everything he has seen and heard woven into narrative. Rustichello shapes it in the style his audiences will understand, ornamented, structured, sometimes blending rumour with eyewitness detail. They are not crafting a cautious academic report. They are creating a book meant to be read aloud to astonish. For Marco, this is more than entertainment. It is a way of returning to the places he knows he will never see again. As he speaks, he walks those roads once more in memory. He stands again in the Khan's hall. He feels the dry wind of the desert, the press of the crowd in Chinese markets, the roll of the ship under his feet. The prison walls blur, the world opens again, at least in his mind. Later readers will wonder over how much is memory, how much is story, how much is shaped by the telling. But they are wondering over something that did not exist before. A written map of the Far East in a European tongue, filled with details no one else had brought back in such scale. When Marco is eventually released and returns once more to Venice, he is older. He resumes the life of a Venetian citizen, managing what property he has, participating in the city's affairs in small ways, watching new generations take up the work of trade and governance. The roar of Kublai's court is far away now, as distant as childhood. He never sets out again along the Silk Road. He never returns to the empire that shaped him. Partly it is circumstance. The Mongol world is changing, less unified, more dangerous. His own age and wealth are better spent in stability than in another perilous gamble. Partly it is the simple truth that one life only holds so many crossings. He has made his. The road that once opened before him, step after step, now feels like something belonging to another time, another world. Yet even as he stays, his story travels. Copies of his book move from hand to hand, copied by scribes, read by merchants, nobles, and dreamers. Some take it as literal truth, others treat it as a fabulous romance. Most cannot separate the two, but that hardly matters. The world beyond the familiar horizon now has a voice and shape in their minds. Marco's. In Venice, he grows old under a sky that has watched him both leave and return. He walks along canals where water slaps against stone in the same patient rhythm it always has. He hears bells that once called him home only in dreams, now ringing over a life at last anchored in one place. But inside he remains a man stretched between worlds, his identity forever divided. Marco of Venice and Marco of the Khan. He will not see Xanadu again. He will not ride those old roads or stand in those great palaces. Instead, he lets them live where they have always lived longest and most, powerfully in memory and in words, carried forward by others who will centuries later ask the same question we ask now. Why did Marco Polo never return? The answer lies not only in miles of road and risk of sea, but in the quiet truth that sometimes, when you have lived fully in two worlds, you cannot truly go back to either. You simply stand where you are, tell your story, and let the journey continue in the minds of those who listen. In the end, Marco Polo's story is not just about how far his feet carried him, but about where his life finally chose to stand still. He has come back to Venice. He has walked once more along damp stone alleys and watched sunlight break into shards across the water. He has sat at tables where wine is poured into familiar cups and bread is broken by familiar hands. Outwardly it seems simple. The journey that began long ago in this lagoon has described a great circle and brought him home. But inside him, nothing is a simple circle. The line of his life runs eastward and never completely turns back. As he grows older, Marco settles into the quiet routines of a Venetian citizen. He manages his affairs, appears in records as owner of this property or claimant to that right, participates in small legal disputes and civic duties like any other man of his standing. To those who pass him in the street, he is just another mature, respectable figure in a city full of them. But his mind is never only in Venice. It is also walking through a hall where pillars rise like the trunks of stone trees, their tops lost in shadow and painted beams. It is also riding along a canal in China, watching barges slide past heavy with grain. It is also lying under a felt tent on the step, listening to the wind stroke the grasses and the horses shifting in the dark. His body has returned. His imagination has not. Sometimes, in the cool of evening, he may find himself standing beside a canal, watching the way lamplight breaks and dances on the water's surface. The scene is beautiful in its own right, but his mind overlays another image on top of it. Lanterns swinging in a Mongol palace courtyard, their glow catching on silk banners as music floats through the air. The two worlds meet for a moment in his vision, then separate again like reflections broken by a ripple. People still ask him for stories. Merchants wonder about trade. Is it true that roads there are so safe you can travel with gold unarmed? Do they really use paper instead of coins? Young men ask about adventure. Did you see armies of thousands? Did the Khan truly sit on a throne of gold? Scholars and clerics lean forward over tables to ask more pointed questions. What of their beliefs? How do their laws compare to ours? Marco answers as best he can, but always with the awareness that he is translating not just languages, but entire ways of thinking into terms his listeners can grasp. Some nod sincerely, others shake their heads, half smiling, as if enjoying a tale rather than absorbing a report. More than once in his later years, he hears whispers that he is exaggerated, that his book is full of marvels designed to dazzle. There is a famous line, perhaps embroidered in the retelling, perhaps not, that when asked on his deathbed if he wanted to retract any of the wonders in his book, Marco replied that he had not told half of what he had seen. Whether or not the words are exactly his, the sentiment feels true. How could any single volume capture an empire, a journey, a life stretched across so many landscapes? For him, those marvels are not decorations. They are memories. To erase them would be like erasing years from his own existence. So why, after having seen so much, does he never set out again? Why does Marco Polo, who spent half his life moving, choose to spend the rest in one place? The answer lies in a woven tangle of reasons. There is age. The body that once endured deserts, mountains, and months at sea is no longer the same. Bones ache more, sleep comes differently, recovery after any hardship takes longer. To ride again into the unknown would no longer be the same kind of adventure. It would be a gamble against a clock that is now audibly ticking. There is the changing world. The great Mongol Empire that once laid a single hand across Asia has begun to loosen its grip. Regions splinter, successors quarrel. Roads that once felt secure under the Khan's authority now carry the risk of local warlords and shifting loyalties. The delicate alignment that made Marco's first journey possible, one Khan in the east, relative stability along the route, and youth on his side, no longer exists. There is also the simple weight of rootedness. Venice may have become a half-remembered dream while he was away, but now it has turned back into a daily reality. There are investments to oversee, relatives to care about, friendships reknit after long absence. Each year that passes after his return weaves another layer of thread tying him to the lagoon, until the idea of pulling them all loose again to chase a horizon begins to feel less like freedom and more like tearing his own life apart. Yet beneath all these practical reasons lies something deeper and quieter. The East, he knew, is gone. Even if he summoned the strength, gathered the money and assembled the courage, Marco could not go back in any true sense. He might travel again to some of the same cities, follow some of the same routes, but the court of Kublai Khan, the particular faces, conversations, balances of power and moods of that time, has dissolved. The palace where he once stood as a favoured foreigner now holds different voices and banners. The officials who greeted him, the servants who knew his footsteps, the guards who recognised his face, are dead or scattered. The Asia of his youth is not waiting for him like a paused game. It has moved on. In this way, the question, why did Marco Polo never return, becomes less about physical travel and more about the nature of time itself. You cannot return to a moment. You cannot step back into the same river. Its water has flowed on. You cannot walk back into a court whose people have been replaced, whose rules have changed, whose emperor has become a portrait on a wall. Marco seems to understand this, at least in some instinctive way. Instead of chasing the ghost of a vanished empire, he does something else. He returns in the only way anyone truly can. He returns in memory. He returns in description. He returns in the act of telling. Every time he describes Kublai's court, a part of him walks through it again. Every time he explains the workings of paper money, in his mind he handles those stamped sheets once more. Every time he speaks of desert caravans, he hears the soft clink of camel bells and feels the dry wind on his face. And every time someone hears him, really hears him, not as a teller of tall tales, but as someone who has carried another world inside his chest, Marco makes that journey again, not with his feet, but with his words. In that sense, his true return to the Silk Road is not a second physical voyage, but a ritual of remembrance repeated over and over until his life ends. It is also how his journey travels beyond him. Long after his bones rest under Venetian stone, sailors, merchants, and eventually explorers of later centuries will read his book. They will trace routes with their fingers across maps that have been redrawn in the light of his descriptions. They will dream of Cathay, of Chipango, Japan, of islands and coasts he's mentioned or rumoured. Some will be inspired to set out, their heads filled with images that began in his voice and Rusticello's script. He did not know it, but by choosing to stay, by living the rest of his days in Venice and letting his journeys move only in stories, Marco helped shift Europe's sense of the possible. The world no longer ended a little past the Holy Land, at the boundaries of familiar pilgrimage. Beyond lay not just vague dragons and empty charts, but cities, systems, and people he had named. The man who never returned to the East helped ensure that, in imaginations, and eventually in ships' wakes, many others would. So when we say, Marco Polo never returned, we're only telling half the truth. He never returned in body. He never again rode out under the banners of the Khan, or stood in the great halls of Xanadu. He never retraced the long arc of desert, mountain, and steppe that once pulled him so far from the lagoon. But in memory he returned again and again, as long as he lived. In his book, he returned every time a page turned. In our minds, he returns each time we follow his path in imagination. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, you can picture him in his final years, an older man in a quiet Venetian room, the window open to the soft slap of water outside, candlelight flickering on worn wooden beams. His eyes are closed, but behind them he is far away, riding with caravans under unfamiliar stars, crossing rivers of ice, standing once more before a ruler whose empire now exists only in history and in the stories he left behind. He never went back to the Silk Road. Instead, he brought the Silk Road back with him, and left it here for us, like a map drawn in words, waiting whenever we close our eyes and let the journey begin again. If these whispered histories have soothed your spirit, others searching for rest might find their way here too through a quiet like or subscription. But for now, until the next legend calls to you from the mists of time, may your slumber be deep and your dreams be magnificent. Sleep well.